Welcome in, everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into something pretty fundamental, something that really impacts the world in ways we might not always realize.
You got that right.
And we're going to be looking at this fascinating source called moral behavior, an AI universal perspective. Now, that title alone kind of suggests that we're not just talking about, like, being polite or holding doors open.
Right.
This is about getting to the core of how moral behavior works across all of society.
Yeah.
And the really intriguing part is we're doing it through the lens of AI, artificial intelligence.
It's a really interesting perspective. I mean, this source, it doesn't just stick to, those theoretical philosophical discussions about morality.
Right.
It gets into how morality is actually woven into our relationships, our history.
Yeah.
It even links up with fields you wouldn't expect, like genetics, philosophy, even physics and math.
Wow.
It's all about understanding this, like, bedrock of what makes us human, on a deeper level.
Yeah. So basically what we're doing today is extracting those big, crucial insights from this moral behavior, an AI universal perspective.
Yeah.
We want to understand how this seemingly human trait, morality, really impacts every aspect of our lives, and especially how a purely analytical AI system views it. Because you know what? When you look at it that way, through that lens, some really unexpected things pop up.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so where do we even begin with something so broad?
Well, like a lot of deep dives, this source starts off with the definition, which I think is a good place for us to start, too.
Makes sense.
So they define moral behavior as those actions and intentions that a social context considers right, good, or acceptable. And it emphasizes these key elements like fairness, justice, compassion, honesty, and a big one, avoiding harm.
Okay, so right off the bat, one of the most interesting things is that, yes, societies might differ a lot on what they specifically consider moral, the details.
Definitely.
But the fact that there is some kind of moral framework in place, that seems to be a universal truth. Like, it's not about whether societies have morals, but more about what those specific morals actually are.
Exactly. It's like a universal constant. And the source illustrates this by looking at different demographics, like take gender, for instance.
Okay.
Now, historically, the way societies expected men and women to act morally, that might have been different. But the need for those moral principles, that stays the same across all genders. To keep society functioning, individuals thriving, you need that. The source even points out how actions like violence or theft are almost universally condemned no matter who's doing them.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's hard to imagine a society where stealing is okay if you're a man, but totally unacceptable if you're a woman.
Right.
Now, here's something I found really interesting. How our own understanding of morality, how we put it into practice, it changes as we go through life. The source kind of maps this out from childhood to old age.
It's a constant evolution. A young kid, they learn about sharing, telling the truth. Those basic building blocks of morality.
Right.
And as teenagers, it gets more complex. They have to deal with social dynamics, understanding stuff like bullying. Then adults, well, they face those intricate moral challenges in their careers, their personal lives. And when you get older, it's more about reflecting on the choices you've made throughout your life.
Right.
Right? And at every stage, moral behavior or the lack of it, it has a huge impact on how we interact, how we see ourselves.
Totally. So, like, a kid developing empathy, that's a fundamental step in understanding morality.
Absolutely.
Or an adult consistently being honest in their work.
Right.
That can have huge ethical implications.
Big time.
Now, when we talk about this universal aspect of morality, we have to bring in culture, right?
Of course.
This is where things get really diverse when it comes to those moral codes. What might be considered, proper etiquette in one culture could be a serious no-no in another.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The source really emphasizes this. Like, those specific norms and values that define moral behavior, they can be drastically different across societies. But here's the key. Every culture has some kind of moral code. They all have ways of regulating behavior. Formal laws, deeply rooted traditions, religious beliefs, they all stem from some underlying moral principles.
I see.
And there are these great examples in the source, like reciprocity, the idea of give and take. It's fundamental in almost every society, but how it plays out can be totally different.
Huh.
And then there's the taboo against incest. almost universal, even though the exact definition can vary culturally.
Interesting.
It's like these shared moral intuitions that run deep.
Yeah, it's almost like humanity has this universal need for a moral operating system. But the specific software, that can be customized depending on the culture, right?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And the source connects this not just to culture, but also to those broader stages of human development. It's not just about age. It's a continuous process. It starts in infancy with those early signs of pro-social behavior and continues throughout our entire lives.
Wow.
Early attachments, those secure bonds, responsive caregiving, those are crucial for developing empathy and trust. And as we grow cognitively, our ability to reason morally, that gets more abstract and complex. And of course, our social experiences, the norms we're exposed to, those are constantly shaping our understanding of right and wrong.
So moral behavior is not just this abstract concept philosophers debate about.
Nope.
This source makes it clear. It's woven into the fabric of our daily lives. So let's talk about that impact. Where does moral behavior really matter for our listeners?
Well, relationships are a big one, right?
Absolutely.
Trust, honesty, empathy, those are like the foundational pillars of healthy relationships, whether it's family, friends, romantic partners.
Yeah.
And when those foundations are broken through infidelity, betrayal, the damage is serious, sometimes irreparable.
Right. And what about the economy?
Yep.
You wouldn't necessarily link morality with, financial reports and the stock market.
Right.
But according to the source.
It's more connected than you might think. A well-functioning economy, it relies heavily on moral behavior. Honesty in business deals, honoring contracts, fair treatment of workers, these are all rooted in moral principles. When you have widespread corruption or unethical business practices, it's not just individual companies that suffer.
Right.
That erodes trust in the whole system, and that hinders growth, stability, everything.
It's like this agreement to play by the rules, and when that breaks down, everyone loses.
Exactly.
Same goes for politics, right? We're governed.
Oh, absolutely. Justice, fairness, accountability, those are moral imperatives for any government to be seen as legitimate. When you see corruption, abuse of power, disregard for the law, people lose trust. And that leads to unrest, instability.
The source even touches on how morality is tied in with law, education, healthcare, even technology, which is changing so rapidly.
It's everywhere.
Legal systems reflect a society's values.
Yeah.
Education tries to pass those values on to the next generation. Healthcare workers face these tough ethical dilemmas all the time. And with all the advancements in technology, we've got these whole new ethical questions about privacy, algorithms, and how tech could be misused.
It really makes you think about how this human element, morality, connects with all these different fields.
Yeah.
Some of them seem completely unrelated at first.
Right.
And that leads us to some of those unexpected connections the source brings up, which I think are really fascinating.
Definitely. Let's hear it. Let's start with human history. How does moral behavior play into that grand narrative?
Well, the source suggests that the course of history is heavily influenced by moral behavior, or the lack of it.
Okay.
Times of peace, progress, widespread cooperation, those often line up with a strong adherence to shared moral principles. And conversely, periods of conflict, oppression, societal decline, those frequently stem from widespread moral failings. Just look at how historical narratives often focus on moral choices of individuals, of whole societies, and the consequences of those choices.
Yeah, it's like history is full of these stories where people are making decisions, and now we judge those decisions through a moral lens.
Right.
And those decisions, they've shaped the world we live in.
They have. What about genetics and biology? That seems like a total shift.
Right. It feels like a whole different area.
Well, while there probably isn't a single morality gene, the source does say that our genes might make us more inclined towards certain traits, like empathy or aggression, and that can indirectly influence our moral behavior.
Okay.
Evolutionary psychology has an interesting take on this, too. They suggest that pro-social behaviors, which are often rooted in morality, might have evolved because they help social groups survive and reproduce. And on a biological level, our brains, they're crucial for moral reasoning. Parts like the prefrontal cortex, they're involved in decision-making, empathy, impulse control, all vital for those moral choices.
Right.
And neurotransmitters, hormones, they also play a role in our social behavior and moral judgments.
It's like biology lays the groundwork, and then our experiences, our conscious choices, those build upon that foundation to shape our moral actions.
Exactly.
And of course, we have to talk about philosophy, because ethics is the study of morality. That connection's pretty obvious.
Oh, for sure. Ethics is a core branch of philosophy that directly looks at the nature of morality. What's right, what's wrong, frameworks for ethical decision-making.
Right.
The source mentions some big ethical theories that have influenced us. There's utilitarianism, which is all about maximizing good for the most people. Then there's deontology, which focuses on duty and rules, regardless of the consequences. And then there's virtue ethics, which emphasizes developing good character. These different philosophical views have shaped our understanding of moral behavior over centuries.
Now, what about physics and mathematics? I'm really curious about that. It seems like a bit of a jump.
I know, right? It's unexpected. But the source makes this cool parallel between cause and effect in physics and moral actions in society.
Okay.
Every moral choice, like every physical action, has consequences that ripple out, shaping lives, social dynamics, and in math, there's game theory. It's great for analyzing strategic interactions like cooperation, competition, trust, all linked to moral considerations. The classic example, the prisoner's dilemma, shows how even when it might seem like it's in your best interest to act immorally, betray someone, in the long run, cooperation is often the more rational strategy. And cooperation, in that context, is a moral act.
So even in the world of numbers, there's logic to moral behavior, especially when you consider the long-term effects.
Precisely.
And speaking of logic, as its own field, how does that fit in?
Well, moral reasoning often uses logical deduction.
Right.
The source uses this simple example. If we agree that causing unnecessary harm is wrong, and we know that lying can cause harm, then logically lying is wrong in a lot of situations.
Right.
To build a strong moral argument or spot flaws in someone else's reasoning, you need this kind of logical thinking.
Got it.
And lastly, the source talks about our state of mind, our belief systems. That's super relevant to how we experience and deal with moral choices.
Yeah, totally.
Our emotions, biases, our overall well-being, they can all influence how we approach moral dilemmas. Stress, anger, empathy, they all play a role. And our beliefs, whether religious or secular, they often provide a moral code for us. Values, guiding narratives, a framework for right and wrong. The source even connects this to soul development, suggesting that a lot of belief systems see moral action as a way to grow spiritually, cultivate virtue.
So we each have this internal compass, shaped by our experiences, beliefs, even our feelings in the moment. And that all feeds into our moral choices.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so we've looked at what moral behavior is, how it seems to be universal, those surprising connections with all sorts of fields. Now let's bring it back to why this matters, both for individuals and for society.
Okay.
What are the consequences of our choices?
Well, for individuals, consistently moral behavior usually leads to good things. More trust, stronger relationships, a sense of purpose, integrity, social acceptance. But when we act immorally, it can lead to guilt, shame, isolation, legal issues, damage to our reputation.
It's like a cycle, right?
Yeah.
Good deeds lead to more positive interactions, which encourage more moral behavior.
It can work that way.
But it's not just about the individual.
Oh.
Our choices affect those around us.
Sure. Moral conduct impacts everyone around you. Acts of kindness, honesty, compassion, those can inspire others, create a more ethical environment.
Yeah.
But immoral actions, those cause harm, distress, erode trust, and that can impact families, communities, even whole societies.
So how does the world react to moral behavior, both the good and the bad?
The source outlines a few ways societies respond.
Okay.
First, we have social norms and those unofficial sanctions. Communities develop unwritten rules, and if you break them, there are consequences.
Right.
It could be disapproval, even ostracism. Then there are formal legal systems. They codify those fundamental moral principles, punish people who violate them.
Yeah.
And our reputation, how much people trust us, that's directly linked to our moral behavior.
Makes sense.
And then you have these situations where there's widespread moral outrage because of perceived injustice. That can fuel social movements, demands for change, accountability.
Right.
And of course, societies celebrate those who show exceptional moral courage or integrity. They become role models.
It's like there's this constant societal evaluation going on, judging our actions to maintain some kind of moral order.
Yeah, I like that.
Now, let's dig into the concepts of right and wrong themselves. The source talks about those ethical implications.
Well, moral behavior is all about right and wrong.
Of course.
And ethical frameworks, like those theories we talked about, utilitarianism, deontology, virtue ethics, they give us different ways to define those concepts. They offer guidelines. But it's important to remember those theories can sometimes disagree on what the right thing to do is.
Right.
And in real life, we face these dilemmas where the right choice isn't clear. We have to weigh different values, potential consequences.
Yeah, definitely. And then there's that whole debate about whether morality is absolute, a set of universal truths, or if it's relative, depending on culture or individual perspective.
It's a fundamental question. We see cultural differences in morals, but the source suggests there might be some shared moral intuitions across cultures.
Oh,
Ultimately, moral behavior means we have this responsibility to ourselves, to others, to society, to think about the impact of our actions, to try to be just and fair.
so if we want to see more moral behavior, both in ourselves and in society, what can we do?
The source has some ideas. Education is key. It helps us develop empathy, think critically, build a moral compass.
Right.
But it can't just be about teaching rules. It needs to explore those deeper ethical principles. And role models are important too.
Yeah.
Leaders, parents, educators, they need to show ethical behavior. And cultivating empathy, understanding others' feelings, that can really encourage compassion, pro-social actions.
Makes sense.
And creating just institutions where everyone has equal opportunities, where the law is applied fairly, that's crucial for a moral society. Open dialogue, critical reflection on moral issues, those help us refine our understanding of right and wrong. Even media and cultural narratives can shape our moral attitudes. And finally, accountability is key. Individuals, institutions, they need to be held responsible for their actions. That reinforces moral norms.
It sounds like it takes a multifaceted approach on both individual and societal levels. Now, towards the end, the source circles back to calculations and logic.
Right.
Which is interesting because you don't always think about those when talking about morality.
Right. It reminds us about deductive reasoning and ethical arguments, like that example with harm and lying. It also brings up game theory again, highlighting how cooperation, often based on trust and reciprocity, leads to better outcomes in the long run, even from a purely strategic view. And it touches on cost-benefit analysis, but with a crucial point. We can't just focus on economics or utility. Just because something seems beneficial in the short term doesn't make it morally right in the long run.
Okay, so to wrap up this deep dive, what's the core message our listeners should take away about moral behavior?
It's more than just rules. It's this fundamental, universal force that shapes every aspect of human life and society.
It's that underlying framework for our interactions.
Yeah.
It influences history. It even shows up in fields like math and biology.
Exactly. And the specific guidelines can change, but the need for a moral compass, some sense of right and wrong that seems constant, and has consequences that reach everywhere, from our closest relationships to the biggest societal structures.
And as the source puts it, tying it to soul development, acting morally isn't just about following rules, it's about personal growth, living a meaningful, virtuous life.
Oh.
So here's something to ponder. As technology becomes more and more integrated into our lives, how might our understanding of moral behavior change, both for us and for the AI we're creating? It really makes you think about how relevant this human trait will be in an increasingly complex world. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
This is DigitView.